everybody, what's up? Welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, your host here at Crimes Untold. Sorry, I look like crap. I currently don't feel good, and I have a sty in I hope everybody had a happy Thanksgiving. Lovely true crime recap. There wasn't a whole lot that really happened this week, which sounds really bizarre because normally there's like a ton that happens. But anywho, so the first thing I want to talk about is actually a set of remains that was identified. So this set of remains hasn't been identified for 79 years due to the fact that this person died in World War II, specifically in a two-tank, like a tank truck, if you will. So he was killed back in November of 1944 in Germany. This man has been identified as that of Lieutenant Gene F. Walker, who was indeed fighting near the Belgian-German border when his M4 Sherman was struck by a anti-tank round. Everybody else managed to escape the blast, but unfortunately he died, and he now has been identified. He was only 27 at the time of his death. He was from Indiana. He was also married, and he had a young child at the time. So sometimes with things like this, they're assumed dead or presumed dead, which is what happened. They presumed that he had died, and unfortunately, obviously, told his wife Mary, and his daughter never got to meet him after he joined the army in 1942, and that's what his obituary says as well. So at the end of the war, it's called the American Graves Registration Command. They were tasked with trying to find the missing U.S. military personnel in Europe at the time, and despite them trying to figure out and looking in the area in 1948 where they thought he was, there was no reports of any military members that had died in that area. So his remains actually were moved. So his remains were taken from the tank in which he died in Hucheln. I think that's how you say it. It's Hucheln. Hucheln. So his remains were taken from the tank in December of 1944, and he was actually buried in the Henry Chapel military cemetery in Homburg, Belgium, which is a U.S. military cemetery. So his name was put on the wall of the missing, which is in the Netherlands, and the remains that were buried in Belgium were exhumed, and they were sent out for further testing, and it was concluded that he was that person. I will say that he will be reburied in San Diego in early 2024, obviously because frozen ground, it's hard to bury people right now, and it was pretty nice to see that they have identified this man. There was also another one that they identified, and it was Lieutenant Gilbert Haldane Myers, who was a Air Force pilot that was killed in 1943, and this is when his bomber was he was flying over Sicily and he was shot down as well. So they were able to identify those remains as well. There's a lot of remains from World War II and any war in general that they haven't been able to identify due to just age and context and things like that. So next on our list is another John Doe. We're going to go to the Cook County John Doe of 2020. He was just identified as that of Todd Allen Kenny. We're going to Illinois. So back in October of 2020, there was a set of remains that was found in an abandoned house in Blue Island, Illinois. This is a suburb of Chicago. So investigators at the time determined that this was a man between the ages of 40 to 60. He was white or Caucasian, between 5'4" and 5'11" in height. This man's remains were described as having been burned. However, when they followed up with analysis, it suggested that there's no evidence to support that theory, rather than he was just severely decomposed. So he had a few articles of clothing on, which is great for us or for the investigators. He had leather shoes, some socks, a shirt, pair of jeans, and he had a jacket with the word love on it. So this man couldn't be identified, unfortunately, and he was entered into NamUs as UP76452. Eventually, they would turn to DNA testing and forensic genetics. So this year, they took the DNA and they sent it to Othram, and Othram was then able to determine that this indeed was Todd Allen Kenny from Michigan. They don't know how he ended up in Illinois. He was born back on March 30th of 1964. And yeah, there's a lot of, they don't know. So if you or anyone you know has any information, you can contact the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office at 312 666 0500. We are actually going to be talking about another John Doe as well. So our next John Doe is actually close to home for me. We're going to be talking about the Fairhaven John Doe of 1985. We're going to Fairhaven, Massachusetts. So in April of 1985, there was a set of remains that were found along the Route 195 in Fairhaven. So police responded to the scene. They determined that this was a male, an adult male in his 30s or 40s at the time of his death, and he was about 5'9". They also believed that he had died approximately 3 years prior to being found. Along with his remains, investigators found spent bullets and just remnants of clothing. This evidence suggested that it was a homicide, but the manner of death was unknown. Over the years, there was many attempts to identify this man. Many. There is the details of his case. He was entered into NamUs as UP58261. There was a cast created of his face and how they thought he may have looked during his life in hopes of creating some leads, but that went nowhere, unfortunately. So in 2022, Massachusetts State Police ended up starting to work with the Bristol County District Attorney's Office. They submitted his skeletal remains, the Fairhaven John Doe, they submitted his remains to Othram, and Othram then was able to build a comprehensible profile for his DNA. So they were then able to track down potential familial DNA of this man. It was determined that this is Keith Olson from Rhode Island. Keith Olson was born back on May 13th of 1953. He was reported missing to the Cranston Police Department by his family back in April of 1981. Which kind of would make sense because we found him in April of 1985. He went missing in April of 1981, so that gives about 4 years difference in time. So their timeline of when exactly he may have died is within that justifiable time period. So now that he's been identified, they're trying to identify a suspect for his murder, and his homicide investigation is still ongoing at this time. The next case we're going to be discussing is that of a woman that, well, the next two are actually of women, one of which was murdered, one murdered somebody. So Rosalind Lewis, who was 24, she was killed by her boyfriend. She seems to be that of such a beloved woman, and she was a cheerleading coach, and her boyfriend, 23-year-old William Thomas, was taken into custody in the connection of murdering her. He's being held on a $1 million bond. It's not stated what plea he has entered or if he has an attorney. I do know that Rosalind was the mother of 3 children, ages 2, 3, and 5. There is a GoFundMe campaign that has been created by her family and loved ones in order to help with the expenses of her funeral and to help with, obviously, her children. She was found dead on November 18th at about 4 a.m., and her cause of death was determined to be that of blunt force trauma. She was found at the Murtis Village Apartments in Jasper, Texas. So according to the GoFundMe fundraiser, it says that she was the cheerleading coach and she basically led the Stunning Stars Cheer and Dance. She founded it in her senior year of high school along with her mom, Shawanda Scott. And so she kind of threw herself into what she loved, which was cheerleading. So at this time, the investigation into her murder is still ongoing. Lastly, we're going to be going to Korea. This one was actually the first case that I found for today, where a true crime fan killed out of curiosity. So Jung Yoo-jung, who's 23, she's been obsessed with crime shows, novels, all of the above. And she scored extremely high on tests that are developed to test the aptitude of a psychopath. Extremely high. So she used an app to meet an English language teacher, then met said person at their home. This happened back in May, mind you. And stabbed her to death. Yes, this happened in South Korea. The prosecutors in this case have asked for her to have the death penalty because they told in the court, basically, they said that Jung was living with her grandfather. She's been looking for people to kill for months, using online tutoring apps as a way to basically sequester these people, and she was unemployed. Um, so she came up with a ruse, basically, of being the mother of a high school student that needed English lessons for her child. She then was able to contact this victim, who was 26 years old at the time, who was living in Busan. This identity has not been disclosed on who this person is. So when Jung went to the tutor's home, she was dressed in a uniform, like a school uniform, that she bought online, in the ruse that she was the child. She then, after being led into the house, attacked this woman and stabbed her more than 100 times in a completely frenzied attack. Yes. She then dismembered this woman, took a cab, and then dumped some of the remains in a parkland that's near a river, which is north of Busan. She was arrested after this taxi driver called the police and told them that a customer they had a blood-soaked suitcase that they had dumped in the woods. If you're gonna commit a murder, don't leave a trail. She literally had browsing history for months of how to kill, how to get rid of a body. She was so completely careless, which the smartest people are the most careless people. They're the dumbest people I've ever met. I don't know why, but they are. So on Friday, she was, I believe, sentenced to life in jail. Yeah, I believe she was sentenced to life in jail. She said that which she confessed to the crime back in June. She said that she basically spoke about how she became interested in committing a murder was piqued because of crime shows and different TV shows. Her statements to the police, however, said that she had only initially moved the body after someone else killed the woman. She later claimed that the killing occurred as a result of an argument. She changed her story multiple times. So South Korea has the death penalty, but it hasn't been carried out since 1997. I'm pretty sure she got life in prison. But yeah, that's the funness of this week, my friends. I know this one is super short, super sweet, but there's not a lot that has happened this week. I'm also working on stuff for December, where I'm still going to do a true crime recap every week, every Saturday, but I'm trying to figure out the whole Vlogmas thing. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this week's video, even though it's a lot shorter. It's like half of the time that it normally is, but I'll see you guys in the next one.